I talked about him coming on the show to be the KTRS legal analyst. We figured, once a month, once every 6 weeks, he'd come on, and we can sort of keep these topics on the side, and then we can all decipher them every 6 weeks or so. And with that, he is now officially a full-time employee here at the Big 550 KTRS, as well as his job at St. Louis University Law School. Good morning, Greg Willard.
Good morning, McGraw.
You've become invaluable to us, sort of dissecting what's really important and what's sort of spun and everything else. I always get this wrong. You were in the White House when?
I started in the White House for President Ford in 1975. I was his White House staff assistant, and then after he left the presidency, McGraw, I moved to California and was his personal aide in California.
So you were not there to be a witness to Watergate, but you certainly were around it.
I was there to see the aftermath. My wife Annie was right in the heart of Watergate. She was one of Ron Ziegler's secretaries in the press office. So my wife Annie is full of stories of having lived through Watergate and the Saturday Night Massacre.
She wasn't the secretary who put her foot on the wrong button and erased 18 minutes of Watergate tapes, was she?
No, that was not Annie. I think Rosemary Woods, God rest her soul, was accused of being that, but it was not my sweet bride, Annie.
All right, I just wanted to make sure. Okay. All right, so Greg Willard, special counsel, was picked yesterday. How big of a news story is that? How big of a deal is it that there's a special prosecutor now looking into Donald Trump's campaign and these Russian ties?
It is probably as significant, McGraw, as any development we've seen in the last 120 days. And as you opened the show, we've seen a few, my friend.
Right.
I think a couple of things that we can say with certainty on a Thursday morning. Number one, for those people who acted legal and appropriately, the appointment of Robert Mueller is a great day.
Okay.
For those who acted illegally or inappropriately, the appointment of Robert Mueller is a very dark day. He was appointed yesterday as special counsel. We have a history going back to, we talked a moment ago, back to Watergate of special prosecutors, independent counsel, and then in 1999, this creature, which currently is in effect called special counsel, was adopted. We have a shining example of how the system is supposed to work. The first special counsel was Jack Danforth.
Yeah.
He was brought in, you'll remember, McGraw, with all of the divisive rhetoric and feelings about the Branch Davidian Waco situation. And Jack Danforth was appointed as special counsel, and he did that investigation, and he gave the report, and he concluded that there was no criminal activity. And guess what? That pretty much ended the conversation.
Right.
Not because of the specific facts that he found, but because it was Jack Danforth who put his name on that report. And I think if we can look in our crystal ball, who knows where this is all going to go, McGraw. But at the end of the process, you can make book on this fact, that the findings of the special counsel will have been compiled and explained to the American people with the utmost integrity, because Robert Mueller is in that league, if you will, of the Jack Danforths. I wish we had more like Jack Danforth and Robert Mueller. Unfortunately, we don't seem to, but Mueller and Danforth are what we would want in a special counsel.
So you're saying in this hyper-partisan world we live in, you're making a prediction that when it's all said and done, and everyone's saying what a great pick, that when it's all said and done, no matter what comes out, good, bad, nothing, the worst, they're all going to say, well, okay, and move on.
Well, but it's to move on is where the divisiveness may arise, McGraw. Right. If you think about the special counsel process or any investigation, it really breaks down into three components. What are the facts? What are the applicable laws?
Right.
And what are the consequences? What I'm saying is, at the end of this process, I predict there will be precious little dispute over the facts.
Okay.
There may be some dispute over the applicable law. Well, that's why we have courts. The consequences will fall into three categories. Constitutional, dare I say the impeachment word on the air this morning,
right.
but it is being bantied about.
Sure.
So the consequences could be three: constitutional,
Right.
criminal, or political.
Right.
What Mueller is charged with is doing the investigation, finding the facts, applying the applicable law, and if in that second category, if crimes have been committed, he was authorized yesterday by Deputy Attorney General Rothenstein to prosecute those.
Does he get hired if James Comey isn't fired?
That's a good question. Comey, his responsibility was investigation, not prosecution.
Right.
Although
which is kind of an important part. They were investigating him, but there was no allegation of any wrongdoing. We just didn't know what was going on.
A lot of smoke. We didn't know if there was fire.
Right.
So, I guess if I were to pick as between would he have been appointed or not, I think probably even if Comey had stayed, we were headed towards a special counsel.
This morning we've talked to a number of people, New York, L.A., Washington, D.C. They all say this is going to take anywhere from 1 to 2 years. Is that possible?
Oh, I think it will definitely take a year and could possibly take 2 years. But again, if you go back in history at some of the more divisive
right.
independent special prosecutor investigations. You had the Lawrence, the Republicans still clamor about how outrageous the Lawrence Walsh investigation was on Iran-Contra, and it went for years.
Right.
The Democrats still rail against Ken Starr and the Monica Lewinsky Whitewater investigation and how it took so long and all. And then there's Jack Danforth and the Waco investigation. That's the model. Jack took his time. His chief of staff, the late Tom Schweik, they did it, and Ed Dowd was his deputy. They did a terrific job. They didn't put themselves on the clock, which they should not, but they didn't drag it out. My guess is Mueller is not going to put himself on the clock, but he won't unnecessarily drag it out. What's a little different, I think, McGraw, from what Mueller has as compared to what Senator Danforth had, there is probably an intense amount of classified information that Mueller is going to have to consider. Because remember, at the core of this investigation is Russian meddling in our campaign last fall. So there will be very, very sensitive intelligence information, counterintelligence information that Mueller is going to have to consider. And that by the nature, as we've talked on the air before, McGraw, that by the nature of classified information is going to take some time.
So what happens if there's highly classified information that, if comes out, could be damaging to the United States, but that's evidence needed to convict somebody?
Well, let me answer that two ways. Number one, and this is why those who acted legal and appropriately ought to be so, and are, I think, so pleased about Mueller, is at the end of this investigation, when he reports to the American people, these are the facts that I found. And in the context of that, he says, and there are a number of facts and evidence that I can't reveal because they're classified, but I am satisfied as to X. I think the typical American in whether it's North Dakota, Louisiana,
right.
Maine, or Texas, they're going to say, I'll accept that.
We'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
Yeah.
But if it goes to trial, that gets to be very difficult. And what happens very often, what you see, whether it was the FBI agent who became a Russian spy,
right.
Aldrich James, what happens is there's a balance because of the risk of disclosing classified information at the trial. They cop a plea. And the government is willing to cop a plea to put him in prison. Hanson's sitting out in Supermax in Colorado for life, but the government did not have to put that evidence on at
right.
trial.
All right, so James Comey, the plan was that he was going to, he has indicated by everyone who's not quoted him, that he wanted to testify, and he wanted to testify in public. Is he still going to do that, or what happens now to James Comey and those memos, which were supposed to become public here shortly?
Well, it'll be an interesting question, McGraw, because I think the last thing Comey wants to do is to interfere with the investigation that his very, very close friend,
right,
Bob Mueller, is going to do. So I suspect at some point there will be a communication between Comey or Comey representatives and Mueller or Mueller representatives as to whether Mueller is comfortable with Comey testifying in a public forum before Mueller has had a chance to interview Comey and do an investigation. So, and again, I think if Mueller says, I would prefer that former director Jim Comey not testify, I think most Americans would say, okay, I will defer, we will defer to Mueller's good judgment because he has the integrity of, say, a Jack Danforth.
Greg Willard with us, a St. Louis University law professor. There's a philosophy out there, and I don't know if this is a question for you, but you have enough expertise you can choose to answer it or not. There are people out there who are saying there's now a war between the White House and the FBI, and that Comey's friends are leaking all sorts of bad information to make Comey look good, to make Trump look bad. Is that what's going on, or what is going on? Why is all of this stuff seems to be coming out in a systematic 5 o'clock? You can set your watch by it every day. There's another terrible story that's leaked that has inside information that makes the president look bad. What is going on?
I think we can consider two different aspects. One is, from time immemorial, there have been leaks. There will continue to be leaks.
Right.
And in virtually every case, we won't know who did it or why.
Right.
Number two, I would caution you against pointing the finger at, say, disgruntled FBI agents who, for example, are angry at the way then Director Comey was treated and how he was fired last week. It very well may be coming, for example, McGraw, from the White House.
Right.
From disgruntled White House staffers.
Right. You don't know where. Your head's on a swivel, but that's the other dangerous thing about leaks. You don't know where they're coming from.
And so, and then the other question about leaks, and this gets to the president's constant reminder of fake news. Just because it's leaked doesn't make it true. So the idea that, well, it's leaked information, therefore we can take it to the bank as accurate, well, that may not be the case, and we see that time and time again. So as to the motives behind the leaking, who knows? Is the leaking more pervasive today than before? I would suggest to you, go back, if you and I were to go back and read our history books, it's probably not any worse today than it was before. I think the difference, McGraw, is the 24-hour news cycle.
Right.
In 1973 with Nixon, you would get 30 minutes in the evening, and you would get the morning papers, and that, my friend, was it.
Right.
Here, it's 24/7 on television and radio, and so I think the volume, if you will, the decibel level of the leaks is magnified.
Robert Mueller is going to go away into a dungeon somewhere and do his due diligence, and he's going to hire whoever he needs to and find and follow the path wherever it leads him. Are we not going to hear from him for a year? Are there going to be leaks coming? I mean, the Ken Starr investigation was a sieve. I don't remember the Lawrence tribe from Iran-Contra. I don't remember Danforth's staff being leaking from the Branch Davidian stuff. So, I mean, what happens now? Are we going to hear this? Where are we now going to get no information till he comes out?
I think it is highly unlikely that we will get any information out of the Mueller investigation for quite some time. There may be leaks. I doubt it. Right. And again, I go back to this is going to be in the Jack Danforth mold of special counsel, highest integrity, highest diligence, and that includes not a lot of leaking. Now, that doesn't mean, McGraw, that the 24-hour news cycle is going to go quiet on Russian meddling and the alleged Trump campaign Russian connection. Our friends and neighbors on Capitol Hill, they're going to keep on keeping on with their investigation. So we'll hear lots from them.
Right.
But I think we will hear precious little from Bob Mueller and his colleagues.
The Ken Starr, a special prosecutor, started with Whitewater and the land dealings and ultimately led, because if memory serves me right, Linda Tripp went there and said, hey, I have this friend of mine who's an intern in the Oval Office, and that then allowed Kenneth Starr to travel down that Monica Lewinsky path. Does Mueller have that same right to follow this everywhere and anywhere it goes, and it might end up with a land deal in Arkansas as opposed to what's going on with Russia?
Yes, and I think, McGraw, your question is spot on. But interestingly enough, when Starr came upon the evidence of alleged criminality from Linda Tripp and others, he had to go back to the 3-judge panel in D.C. who appointed him to get authority.
Okay.
Mueller does not. Mueller has been authorized, and he has the power to investigate and, if necessary, prosecute, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from his investigation, close quote. So he already has the power to expand it if he finds peripheral, if you will, criminality. But again, the president this morning, I just saw before I walked into the studio, McGraw, that he's tweeted that this is a witch hunt.
Yes.
I would, with all respect to the President of the United States, witch hunt and Robert Mueller is an oxymoron.
Last question for Greg Willard. Does President Trump have the power to fire Robert Mueller?
Under the regulations, the only person who has the power to fire Robert Mueller is the Attorney General, and he's recused himself, so it's Deputy Attorney General Rothenstein. So as a technical matter, under the regulation, only Rothenstein can fire Mueller. I think as a technical constitutional matter, if President Trump wants to fire Mueller, he can fire Mueller. Back to our earlier conversation.
That's our Saturday Night Massacre.
Well, I would suggest to you, my friend, it is the Saturday Night Massacre on steroids, because back to facts, applicable law, consequences, constitutional, there would not be a nanosecond before an impeachment article was filed in the House of Representatives if he were to attempt to fire Mueller.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is worth 3 credit hours towards your law degree at St. Louis University. Is there anything I'm not asking you that is an interesting nugget or information, that's something that you wanted to say, or something I'm not asking you?
Well, I guess the one other piece that we focused largely on the criminal investigation and the Mueller investigation, but also I think just as American citizens, let's remind ourselves that the FBI and the FBI agents and other people in the intelligence community, there is an enormous counterintelligence piece to this, and we'll never hear about that. That the FBI and the other agencies are doing their level best every day to protect us from these threats and attacks, in this case the Russians, from a counterintelligence standpoint. And while we can sing the praises of Bob Mueller this morning, we darn well ought to sing the praises of those FBI agents who are out there on the counterintelligence side also.
Greg Willard, adjunct professor, St. Louis University Law School, our legal analyst here on the Big 550 KTRS. Thank you very much. Great stuff. As
Great
always.
to be with you, my friend.
929 Big 5.